The sound of Clara Brennan's desperate whisper through the thin boarding house walls made Jake Hollister freeze with his hand halfway to his door handle. And in that moment, the hardened mountain man realized that some prayers were meant to be answered by flesh and blood rather than angels. It was late October in 1878, and the small mining town of Silver Ridge, Montana Territory, had grown rough around the edges as winter approached. Jake had come down from his cabin in the mountains to sell his furs and stock up on supplies before the heavy snows came. He had taken a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, the only respectable lodging in a town that had 3 saloons for every church. The room next to his had been empty when he arrived that morning, but he had heard someone moving in there during the evening, soft footsteps, and the creak of the bed frame. Now, standing in the dim hallway lit only by a single oil lamp, Jake heard words that cut straight through his weathered exterior. The voice was young, female, and trembling with fear. "Please, God, just one safe night. Just let me sleep without fear for one night. I cannot run any more. I have nowhere else to go. Please, just one safe night." Jake's jaw clenched. He knew that kind of fear. He had heard it before, years ago, in his sister's voice before she died. He had been too late then, too young and powerless to help, but he was not that boy anymore. He was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle hardened by years in the mountains, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full elk carcass and hands that could break a man's arm as easily as snapping kindling. He did not knock on her door. He did not want to frighten her further. Instead, Jake walked quietly back to his own room, grabbed his bedroll and his rifle, and returned to the hallway. He settled himself on the floor directly outside her door, his back against the wall, the rifle across his lap. If anyone wanted to get to that girl, they would have to go through him first. The floorboards were hard and cold, but Jake had slept in worse places. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and tipped his hat down over his eyes, but he did not sleep. He listened. Every creak of the building, every footstep on the stairs, every sound from the street below registered in his awareness. This was how he stayed alive in the wilderness, and tonight he would use those same skills to keep watch. Hours passed. The sounds from the saloons gradually died down. Jake heard the woman in the room move once, the bed creaking as she shifted position, but otherwise there was silence. He thought perhaps she had finally found the sleep she needed. Around 3 in the morning, Jake heard what he had been half expecting. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, uneven and purposeful. 2 men, by the sound of it. They reached the top of the landing and paused. Jake did not move, but his hand tightened on his rifle. "That is her room," one of them whispered, his voice slurred with drink. "Landlady said she took the room at the end. You sure she is the one Calhoun wants?" the second man asked. "Matches the description. Brown hair, green eyes, came in on the afternoon stage. She is the one who ran off with his money." Jake's eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. So that was the story. Whether it was true or not did not matter to him right now. What mattered was that these men meant the girl harm. "Should be easy enough," the first man said. "Just grab her and bring her back. Calhoun said he would pay us $50. They started down the hallway. Jake waited until they were close enough. Then he stood up in one smooth motion, his full height and breadth blocking the narrow corridor. The rifle was not pointed at them yet, but it was ready. "Gentlemen," Jake said quietly, his voice like gravel, "I think you have the wrong room." The 2 men stopped short. They were typical hired toughs, all swagger and no substance. The first one, a wiry man with a scarred face, recovered quickly. "This is not your business, friend. We have got business with the lady in that room." "I am making it my business," Jake said. His tone had not changed, but something in his stance made both men take an involuntary step back. "The lady is under my protection now. You can turn around and walk away, or I can make you wish you had." The second man, broader and meaner looking, put his hand on his pistol. "There are two of us and one of you." Jake smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I have killed grizzly bears with my bare hands. I have survived 3 winters alone in the high mountains. I have tracked wolverines through blizzards and fought off wolf packs. Do you really think 2 drunk fools with pistols scare me?" The men looked at each other. The wiry one was calculating, trying to determine if they could take him. Jake saw the moment he decided to try. The man's hand went for his gun. Jake moved faster. He swung the rifle stock up and caught the wiry man under the chin with enough force to lift him off his feet. The man crashed into his companion, and both of them went down in a tangle of limbs. Before they could recover, Jake had his rifle leveled at them, and there was no mistaking the look in his eyes. "Next time I will not be gentle," Jake said. "Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you walk." The men scrambled to their feet and half ran, half stumbled back down the hallway and down the stairs. Jake listened until he heard the front door slam. Then he settled back into his position outside the woman's door. His heart rate had barely elevated. This was nothing compared to facing a charging bear. Inside the room, Clara had heard everything. She sat on her bed, her heart pounding, her hands clutched together. She had heard the men talking about Sela's cowhound, and her blood had run cold. She had known he would send people after her. She had just hoped she could get further away before they found her. But then she had heard another voice, deep and calm and utterly unafraid. She had heard the brief scuffle, heard the men retreat. And now, pressing her ear to the door, she could hear the faint sound of someone breathing on the other side. Someone was standing guard outside her room, her eyes filled with tears. She had prayed for one safe night, and God had sent her a guardian. She did not know who he was or why he had helped her, but gratitude flooded through her so powerfully that she had to put her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. Clara lay back down on the bed, and for the first time in 6 weeks, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. When morning light began to filter through the thin curtains, Jake finally allowed himself to relax slightly. He had heard no more trouble during the night. He stood up, his muscles stiff from the cold floor, and stretched. He was about to head to his own room when he heard movement behind the door he had been guarding. The door opened a crack, and a young woman's face appeared. Jake found himself looking into the greenest eyes he had ever seen, set in a face that was lovely despite being pale with exhaustion and marked by fear. She had dark brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and she could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. "You," she whispered. "You were the one, last night." Jake nodded. He suddenly felt awkward, unsure of what to say. He was more comfortable with silence and solitude than with conversation, especially with a woman who was looking at him as if he had hung the moon. "Thank you," Clara said, and her voice broke on the words. "I prayed for one safe night, and you gave it to me. I do not know who you are or why you helped me, but thank you." "Jake Hollister," he said gruffly, "and you do not need to thank me. No man should terrorize a woman in the night." "I am Clara Brennan," she said. She opened the door a bit wider. "Those men last night, they are looking for me. They work for someone who claims I stole from him." "Did you?" Jake asked bluntly. Clara's chin came up, and he saw a flash of spirit in those green eyes. "I took what was mine by right. He claimed it was his, but he is a liar and a cheat. I worked for him for 2 years, and he never paid me a fair wage. When I finally had enough and demanded what he owed me, he laughed in my face, so I took it. I took exactly what he owed me, not a penny more." Jake studied her face. He had become good at reading people during his years in the wilderness. Animals did not lie, and when you spent most of your time with them, You learn to see through human deception easily. This girl was telling the truth, or at least she believed she was. "How much are we talking about?" he asked. $300, Clara said. 2 years of wages at $15 a month. He paid me maybe $20 total in all that time, always claiming he would pay me later. That business was slow. But I saw the money he made. I kept his books. I knew he was cheating me. Jake nodded slowly. "Where is this money now?" Clara hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She trusted this man. He had protected her when he had no reason to. "Sewn into the lining of my carpet bag. Everything I own in the world is in that bag and in those hidden pockets." "And where were you planning to go?" Jake asked. "I do not know," Clara admitted. "I got on a stage heading west and just kept going. I thought maybe I could find work in one of the mining towns, cooking or cleaning. I can keep books too, but I doubt anyone here needs a bookkeeper." She looked at him with those earnest green eyes. "I just want a chance to start over somewhere he cannot find me." Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. "Come with me," he said. Clara blinked. "What?" "I have a cabin up in the mountains about 2 days' ride from here. It is remote. No one will find you there. You can stay until spring, and by then those men will have given up looking. Then you can decide where you want to go." "I cannot impose on you like that," Clara protested, even though hope was blooming in her chest. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Jake said. "I know you are running from something that scares you. I know you have nowhere else to go. And I know that if I leave you here, those men will be back with more friends." He met her eyes steadily. "I am heading back to my cabin tomorrow. If you want to come with me, you are welcome. If not, that is your choice. But know that I am offering you a safe place to stay, nothing more. I am not expecting anything from you except perhaps some help with cooking, since my skills in that area are limited to keeping meat from spoiling." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Jake's expression darkened for just a moment. "I had a sister once. She was running from a bad man and no one helped her. By the time I found out, it was too late. I was 15 and working a ranch 200 miles away. By the time I got home, she was dead." He looked away. "I cannot help her now, but I can help you." "I am so sorry," Clara whispered. "It was a long time ago," Jake said gruffly. "Are you coming with me or not?" Clara did not hesitate. "Yes. Yes, I will come with you," Jake nodded. "Good. Meet me at the livery stable at dawn tomorrow. Bring only what you can carry. We will be traveling fast and light." He turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. Do you know how to shoot?" Clara shook her head. "No, I have never touched a gun." "Then your first lesson starts today," Jake said. "If you are going to live in the mountains, you need to know how to protect yourself. Meet me outside of town in an hour near the big cottonwood tree by the creek. And Miss Brennan, do not tell anyone where you are going, not even the landlady." "I understand," Clara said. "And Mr. Hollister, thank you for everything." Jake just nodded and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the hallway. Clara closed her door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She did not know this man, not really, but every instinct told her she could trust him. He had kept watch over her all night, expecting nothing in return. He had protected her from men who meant her harm, and now he was offering her sanctuary. She said a quick prayer of thanks, then began gathering her few belongings. She had to be ready. An hour later, Clara made her way carefully out of town, checking constantly to make sure she was not being followed. She found the cottonwood tree easily. It was massive and old, its leaves turned golden with autumn. Jake was already there, and he was not alone. He had brought 2 horses, both saddled and ready. "This is Smoke," Jake said, indicating a gray mare with gentle eyes. "She is calm and steady, good for a beginner. We are going to start with the basics." He spent the next 2 hours teaching Clara how to handle a pistol. He was patient but firm, correcting her stance and her grip until she got it right. Clara was a quick learner, and by the end of the lesson, she could hit a target more often than not. "Good," Jake said with approval. "You have steady hands. That will serve you well. We will practice more on the trail and once we get to the cabin. By spring, you will be able to defend yourself if you need to." They walked the horses back toward town, keeping to the edge of the settlement. As they approached the livery, Clara saw 3 men standing near the boarding house, and her blood ran cold. One of them was Silas Calhoun himself. She must have made a sound, because Jake immediately looked down at her. "What is it?" "That man," Clara whispered, nodding toward Calhoun. "The one in the expensive coat. That is Silas Calhoun. He came himself." Jake studied the man. Calhoun was in his 40s, well-dressed and well-fed, with the look of someone who was used to getting his way. He was talking to 2 rough-looking men, probably more hired help. "Stay calm," Jake said quietly. "Keep your head down and keep walking. We are just 2 people heading to the stable, nothing unusual about that." They made it to the livery without incident. Jake spoke briefly with the stable owner about leaving his horses there overnight. Then he walked Clara back to the boarding house through the back entrance. "Stay in your room," Jake told her. "Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me. I will come get you before dawn tomorrow." "What if they come tonight?" Clara asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Then I will be outside your door again," Jake said simply. "They are not going to touch you. I promise you that." Clara nodded, reassured by the absolute certainty in his voice. She slipped inside and hurried up the back stairs to her room. Once inside, she locked the door and pushed the small dresser in front of it for extra measure. Then she sat on the bed and tried to calm her racing heart. She had been so close to Calhoun. If he had looked in her direction, if he had recognized her, it would all be over. But Jake had been there, calm and steady, and his presence had given her the courage to keep walking. True to his word, Jake took up his position outside Clara's door again that night. This time he was ready for trouble. He had his rifle, his pistol, and his knife, and he had positioned himself where he could see the entire hallway and the top of the stairs. Around midnight, he heard voices downstairs. Calhoun's voice, raised in anger. "I know she is here. The stage driver said she got off here. I want every room searched." Mrs. Henderson's voice, firm despite her age. "I will not have you terrorizing my guests, Mr. Calhoun. If you have a legitimate claim against someone, you can take it to the sheriff in the morning." "The sheriff is in my pocket," Calhoun snarled. "Now get out of my way, old woman." Jake heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets. He stood up, his rifle ready, and stepped into the shadows at the end of the hallway. He wanted to see how many men he was dealing with. Calhoun appeared first, followed by 4 men. Better odds than last night, but still manageable. They started trying doors, and Jake knew it was only a matter of time before they reached Clara's room. He stepped out of the shadows. "That is far enough," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the confined space. Calhoun spun around, his eyes narrowing when he saw Jake. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who does not appreciate men terrorizing women in the middle of the night," Jake said. "Turn around and leave." Calhoun laughed. "You are that mountain man from last night. My men told me about you. 1 man, no matter how big, cannot stand against 5 of us." "You are welcome to test that theory," Jake said calmly. "But know this. I can put a bullet through your eye before any of your men can clear leather. And I promise you, even if they get me after that, you will be dead first. Is finding 1 girl really worth your life?" Calhoun's expression hardened. "She stole from me. $300. That is a hanging offense." "According to her, you stole from her first," Jake said. 2 years of unpaid wages. Seems to me she was just taking what was rightfully hers." "She is a liar," Calhoun spat, "and she is coming back with me one way or another." "No," Jake said flatly, "she is not." The standoff stretched out, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Calhoun's men were nervous. They had not signed on to face down a man who looked like he could tear them apart with his bare hands, a man who was clearly unafraid of dying. Finally, Calhoun made a fatal mistake. He went for his gun. Jake was faster. His rifle barked once, and Calhoun's gun went flying from his hand along with two of his fingers. Calhoun screamed and grabbed his bleeding hand. His men froze, shocked by the speed and accuracy of the shot. "Next bullet goes through something more vital," Jake said coldly. "Now get him out of here, bandage his hand, and get out of Silver Ridge. If I see any of you again, I will not be so merciful." The men grabbed Calhoun and half carried, half dragged him down the stairs. His screams echoed through the building. Jake listened until he heard the front door slam. Then he walked to the window at the end of the hallway and watched until he saw them ride out of town. Only then did he hear the soft sound of a door opening. Clara stood in her doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "You shot him." "I shot his hand," Jake corrected. "He will live, but he will think twice before coming after you again." Clara walked toward him, and before Jake could react, she threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. "You saved me." Again. Jake stood stiffly for a moment, unused to being touched, unused to gratitude expressed so physically. Then slowly he brought one arm up and patted her back awkwardly. "You are safe now. That is what matters." Clara pulled back, looking up at him. Even in the dim hallway, he could see tears shining in her green eyes. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Jake said gruffly. "Now get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." Clara nodded and went back to her room, but sleep was impossible. She lay in her bed, replaying the events of the past 2 days in her mind. This man, this stranger, had upended his own plans to protect her. He had faced down Calhoun and his men without flinching. He had offered her sanctuary in his home, expecting nothing in return. She did not understand it, but she was grateful for it. More than grateful. She felt something else, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in her chest when she thought about Jake Hollister and his steady gray eyes, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness. But she pushed those thoughts away. He was helping her because he was a good man, because of what had happened to his sister. Nothing more. She could not afford to read more into it than that. The next morning, Clara met Jake at the livery stable just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. She carried her carpet bag and wore her warmest clothes. Jake gave her a critical look, then nodded. "Good. You dressed practical. Here, put this on too." He handed her a heavy wool coat that was far too big for her. "It is going to get cold in the mountains." They mounted up, and Jake led the way out of town. Clara looked back once at Silver Ridge, wondering if she would ever see civilization again. Then she turned her face forward and followed Jake into the wilderness. The ride was long and hard. Jake set a steady pace, following trails that Clara could barely see. They climbed higher and higher into the mountains, leaving the scrub grass and cottonwoods behind for pine and aspen. The air grew thinner and colder. Clara's legs ached from hours in the saddle, but she did not complain. Jake checked on her periodically, making sure she was keeping up, offering her water and jerky when they stopped briefly to rest the horses. They did not talk much during the ride. Jake was not a talkative man, and Clara was concentrating too hard on staying in the saddle and not falling behind. But the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who did not need to fill every moment with words. As the sun began to set on their first day of travel, Jake led them to a small clearing near a stream. "We will camp here tonight," he said, dismounting with easy grace despite the long day. "There is a cave nearby that will provide shelter." He helped Clara down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. She was so stiff and sore that she nearly fell when her feet hit the ground, but Jake caught her easily. "First long day in the saddle is always the hardest. It will be easier tomorrow." He was true to his word about the cave. It was small but dry, with evidence that Jake had used it before. There was a fire ring already set up, and he had it blazing within minutes. He showed Clara where to lay out their bedrolls, positioned so they would get the heat from the fire but be protected from sparks. "I am going to hunt us some fresh meat for dinner," Jake said. "You stay here and rest. Do not wander off. If you hear or see anything that scares you, fire 2 shots in the air. I will hear them and come running." He left her with a pistol and his rifle, and then he disappeared into the darkening forest with barely a sound. Clara sat by the fire, marveling at how quietly such a large man could move. She had never met anyone like Jake Hollister. The men she had known in her life had been talkers, boasters, men who felt the need to prove their worth with words. Jake simply existed, solid and real and utterly confident in who he was. He returned less than an hour later with 2 rabbits already skinned and cleaned. He roasted them over the fire, and Clara was surprised by how good they tasted. She had eaten in fine restaurants when she had traveled with her father before he died, but somehow this simple meal in a mountain cave tasted better than any of those fancy dishes. "Tell me about your cabin," Clara said as they ate. "What is it like?" Jake considered the question. "It is small. 1 room with a loft for sleeping, stone fireplace, good chimney. I built it myself 5 years ago when I decided I had had enough of towns and people. There is a stream nearby with good fishing. Game is plentiful. I trap in the winter, sell the furs in the spring." He looked at her. "It is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 20 miles away. You might find it lonely." "I think it sounds wonderful," Clara said honestly. "I have spent the past 2 years in a dusty office in a mining town, keeping books for a man I hated, living in a single room above a saloon." Isolation sounds like paradise. Jake smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less severe. "You might change your mind when winter sets in and the snow is 10 feet deep." "I might," Clara agreed, "but I doubt it." They finished eating and Jake banked the fire. He showed Clara how to wrap herself in her bedroll to stay warm, and he positioned himself between her and the mouth of the cave. Even here, even in the wilderness where no one could have possibly followed them, he was still protecting her. Clara lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The stream gurgled over rocks. The fire crackled softly. And somewhere in all of that, she could hear Jake's steady breathing. She felt safer than she had in months, maybe years. Finally, she slept. The second day of riding was, as Jake had predicted, easier than the first. Clara's muscles were still sore, but she was getting used to the rhythm of the horse's movement. The scenery was breathtaking. They climbed higher into the mountains, following narrow trails that switchbacked up steep slopes. Clara could see for miles, endless forests of pine and aspen stretching out in every direction, broken only by rocky peaks that still held snow on their highest reaches. In the early afternoon, they stopped by a waterfall to let the horses drink and rest. Jake filled their canteens with the icy water and Clara splashed some on her face, gasping at the cold. "It is glacier melt," Jake explained. "Purest water you will ever taste." He was right. Clara drank deeply, the water so cold it hurt her teeth, but refreshing beyond measure. "Are we almost there?" she asked. Jake pointed to a peak in the distance. "See that mountain, the one that looks like a bear's head? My cabin is in the valley just beyond that. We should reach it by nightfall." They pushed on, and true to Jake's word, as the sun was beginning to set, they came over a final ridge and Clara saw the cabin. It was exactly as Jake had described it. Small and sturdy, built of logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It sat in a clearing near a stream, surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Clara realized that Jake must have banked the fire before he left, knowing he would return. "It is perfect," Clara breathed. Jake looked pleased by her reaction. He dismounted and helped her down, then led the horses to a small barn behind the cabin. While he tended to them, Clara explored the cabin. Inside, it was neat and organized, everything in its place. The main room contained a table and chairs, a large stone fireplace, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a ladder leading to a loft. There was a small kitchen area with a wood stove, and Clara could see that Jake had laid in substantial supplies for the winter. Jake came in carrying her carpet bag. "You can take the loft," he said. "I will sleep down here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Clara protested. "You are not. I always sleep down here in winter, warmer. The loft is where I sleep in summer when it is too hot down here." He climbed the ladder and deposited her bag in the loft, then came back down. "You must be exhausted. Why do you not rest while I make us some dinner?" Clara was exhausted, but she was also determined to pull her own weight. "You said you needed help with cooking. Let me earn my keep." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but then he nodded. "All right. But do not feel like you have to prove anything. You have had a hard few days." They worked together to make a simple dinner of beans, bacon, and cornbread. Clara was surprised by how well-stocked Jake's kitchen was. She had expected a bachelor's bare minimum, but he had flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, dried beans, coffee, and a variety of preserved meats. He even had a small collection of herbs hanging from the rafters. "I might not be a great cook, but I know what I need," Jake explained when he saw her looking at the supplies. "Winter up here is long. You need good food to survive it." As they ate, Clara found herself watching Jake in the firelight. He was a large man, easily the biggest she had ever met, with broad shoulders and arms that strained the fabric of his shirt. His hair was brown and hung past his collar, thick and slightly wavy. He had a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of beard, and those steady gray eyes that seemed to see everything. There was nothing soft about him. He was all hard muscle and rough edges, shaped by the harsh environment he had chosen to live in. But there was also a gentleness in the way he moved, in the way he spoke to her. He had handled her carpet bag carefully, as if aware that it contained everything she owned. He had checked on her throughout their journey, making sure she was comfortable, that she had enough water, that she was not too tired. And he had stood guard outside her door for 2 nights, expecting nothing in return. Clara realized with a start that she was staring, and she quickly looked down at her plate. But when she glanced back up, she found Jake watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are safe here," Jake said quietly, as if he could sense the direction of her thoughts. "I want you to know that. You can stay as long as you need to, and I will never do anything to make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. You have my word on that." "I know," Clara said, and she meant it. "I trust you, Jake. I do not know why, but I do." Something flickered in Jake's eyes, some emotion too quick to name. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around, teach you where everything is. If you are going to stay here through the winter, you need to know how to take care of yourself in case something happens to me." "What could happen to you?" Clara asked, alarmed. "Lots of things in the mountains," Jake said practically. "Bear attack, falling through ice, avalanche, broken leg. I am careful, but accidents happen. I am not trying to scare you, just being realistic. You need to know how to survive on your own." Clara nodded, though the thought of being alone in this remote cabin was terrifying. But she understood his reasoning. This was not the civilized world she had grown up in. This was the wilderness, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. She climbed up to the loft and found that Jake had already laid out her bedroll on a real mattress stuffed with pine needles and moss. It was surprisingly comfortable. She could hear Jake moving around below, banking the fire and checking the door and windows. Even here, in his own home, he was being vigilant. Clara changed into her nightgown and slipped under the blankets. She was asleep within minutes, the exhaustion of the past few days finally catching up with her. Over the next few weeks, Clara settled into life at the cabin. Jake was true to his word about teaching her everything she needed to know. He showed her how to chop wood, how to maintain the fire, how to find her way back to the cabin if she got turned around in the forest. He taught her to fish in the stream and to identify edible plants. He continued her shooting lessons, and Clara became proficient with both pistol and rifle. In turn, Clara transformed the cabin. She cooked meals that were far superior to anything Jake had made for himself. She organized his supplies more efficiently. She mended his clothes and patched holes in his blankets. She even convinced him to let her make curtains for the windows from some spare fabric she found. They fell into an easy routine. Jake would go out to check his trap lines or hunt for fresh meat while Clara tended the cabin and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Clara learned about Jake's life before the mountains. He had grown up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 4 children. After his sister died, he had left home at 16 and never gone back. He had worked as a ranch hand, a scout, and a guide before finally settling in these mountains 5 years ago. In turn, Clara told him about her own life. She had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a bookkeeper. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her alone, teaching her his trade. When he died 3 years ago, Clara had been left with no family and no prospects. She had worked as a governess for a while, then as a clerk, before ending up in Sela's cowhound's employ. That had been a mistake from the start, but she had been desperate and out of options. "You are good with numbers," Jake observed one evening as he watched her organizing his accounts. He had been meticulous about recording his fur sales and expenses, but Clara had brought a professional's eye to the task. "You could probably make a good living as a bookkeeper in one of the bigger towns." "Maybe," Clara said, "but I would rather be here." Jake looked at her in surprise. "Really? You do not miss civilization? Other women to talk to, shops and churches and society?" Clara considered the question honestly. "I thought I would miss those things. But I do not. I like the quiet here. I like the simplicity. Wake up, do the work that needs doing, go to sleep. No one judging me, no one gossiping about me, no one trying to cheat me or use me." She met his eyes. "I like being here with you, Jake. You treat me like an equal, like I have value beyond what I can do for you. That is rarer than you might think." Jake looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "You do have value. You are smart and capable. Any man would be lucky to have you around." The words hung in the air between them, taking on meanings that perhaps Jake had not intended. Clara felt her cheeks warm, and she bent her head back over the ledger to hide her reaction. The truth was, Clara had developed feelings for Jake that went far beyond gratitude. She had tried to fight them, tried to tell herself that she was just confusing safety and protection with something deeper. But she could not deny what she felt when Jake came back from his trap lines each day, when he smiled at her over dinner, when he sat close to her by the fire, and they talked about everything and nothing. She was falling in love with him, and she had no idea if he felt the same way. Jake, for his part, was fighting his own battle. He had brought Clara here to protect her, to give her a safe place to heal and recover from the fear she had been living with. He had not expected to enjoy her company so much. He had not expected to look forward to coming home each day, to seeing her face light up when he walked through the door. He had not expected to lie awake at night in his bedroll downstairs, thinking about her sleeping in the loft above him, wondering what it would be like to hold her, to kiss her, to have the right to call her his. But he had nothing to offer her. He was a mountain man, barely civilized, living in isolation by choice. She deserved better than that. She deserved a real home in a real town with neighbors and friends and a husband who could give her comfort and security. When spring came, she would leave, and that was how it should be. Even if the thought of her leaving made his chest ache in a way he had not felt since his sister died. November gave way to December, and the first serious snow came. Clara woke one morning to find the world transformed, everything covered in a thick blanket of white. Jake was already up, as always, and he had coffee ready. "Storm came in overnight," he said. "We will be snowed in for a few days. Good thing we are well stocked." Being snowed in meant spending even more time together in the cabin's close quarters. Clara read aloud from Jake's collection of books while he worked on repairing his traps and maintaining his equipment. They played cards in the evening, and Clara discovered that Jake was a terrible bluffer. She won more often than not, and she delighted in his grumpy reaction every time she beat him. On the third night of the storm, they were sitting by the fire when Jake suddenly asked, "What will you do when spring comes?" The question caught Clara off guard. She had been trying not to think about the future, trying to live in each day as it came. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I will need to find work somewhere, maybe one of the bigger towns like Helena or Butte." Jake nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "You could do well in a place like that. You have skills people need." "What about you?" Clara asked. "Will you stay here?" "This is my home," Jake said simply. "I will be here until the day I die, most likely." Clara felt a sharp pang at the thought of leaving, of going back to civilization and never seeing Jake again. Before she could think better of it, she heard herself saying, "What if I stayed?" Jake's head snapped up, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "What? What if I stayed here?" Clara repeated, her heart pounding. "With you. I could help you with the trapping, the hunting. I am getting good with a rifle, and I already manage the household. We work well together, do we not, Clara?" Jake said, and there was something pained in his voice. "You cannot stay here. This is no life for a woman like you." "A woman like me?" Clara felt a flash of anger. "What does that mean? Do you think I am too soft for this life? Too civilized? I have been here for 2 months, Jake, and I have not complained once. I chop wood, I haul water, I dress game. What more do I need to prove?" "It is not about proving anything," Jake said, standing up and pacing away from her. "You deserve more than this. You deserve a real life with other people, with a future." "And what if this is the future I want?" Clara stood up too, facing him. "What if I am tired of trying to fit into a world that never wanted me? What if I have found something here, something real and valuable, and I do not want to give it up?" Jake turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was longing there, raw and powerful, but also fear. "You are not thinking clearly. You are grateful to me for helping you, and you are confusing that with something else." "Do not tell me what I am feeling," Clara said fiercely. She crossed the room to stand in front of him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "I know my own heart, Jake Hollister. I am grateful to you, yes. You saved my life, but that is not why I want to stay. I want to stay because I am happy here. I want to stay because I respect you and admire you, and because I have never felt as safe and valued as I do when I am with you." She took a deep breath. "I want to stay because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Jake stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and wonder and something that looked like hope. "You cannot love me," he said, but his voice was barely a whisper. "You barely know me." "I know you better than I have known anyone," Clara said. "I know that you are kind and strong and honorable. I know that you would give everything to protect someone who needed help. I know that you read poetry by the fire when you think I am asleep. I know that you talk to your horses like they are friends. I know that you have the most beautiful smile I have ever seen, even though you do not show it often enough." She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating hard and fast beneath her palm. "I know that my heart beats faster when you walk through that door every day. I know that I would rather be here in this cabin with you than anywhere else in the world with anyone else. Is that not love, Jake? Because if it is not, then I do not know what love is." Jake closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Clara saw her own feelings reflected back at her. "I love you too," he said roughly. "God help me, I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, to remember that you were here because you needed protection, not because you wanted me. But I love you, Clara. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you opened your door that first morning and thanked me with tears in your eyes." Clara felt joy explode in her chest. "Then why are we fighting this?" "Because I have nothing to offer you," Jake said. "I am a rough man living a rough life. You deserve silk dresses and fine houses and servants to do the hard work." "I hate silk dresses," Clara said with a watery laugh. "They are uncomfortable and impractical, and I have lived in fine houses, Jake. They were cold and lonely. This cabin is worth more to me than all of that because you are in it." Jake cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "Are you sure, once winter breaks, you could still leave? You could have a different life?" "I am sure," Clara said firmly. "I want this life, I want you." Jake bent his head and kissed her, and Clara felt like she had come home. His lips were gentle despite his size, reverent, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I will build you a bigger cabin," he promised. "Something with more room, with real windows and a separate bedroom. I will trap more, sell more furs. I will give you the best life I can." "You have already given me the best life I can imagine," Clara said. "Everything else is just details." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future in a way they had not allowed themselves to before. Jake would build additions to the cabin in the spring. Clara would plant a garden. They would get chickens and maybe a cow. They talked about trips to town once or twice a year for supplies and to sell furs, but mostly about building a life here together, away from the world. It was past midnight when they finally banked the fire and prepared for bed. Jake climbed the ladder to the loft with Clara, and for the first time, they lay down together on the mattress, fully clothed but wrapped in each other's arms. "I never thought I would have this," Jake murmured into her hair. "I thought I would grow old alone up here, and I was fine with that. But now that I have you, I cannot imagine going back to that loneliness." "You will never be lonely again," Clara promised. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." The winter deepened, and if anything, the harsh weather only brought Clara and Jake closer together. They were each other's whole world, snowed in and isolated, but neither of them minded. Clara had never been happier. She woke up every morning in Jake's arms, spent her days working alongside him, and fell asleep each night listening to his steady heartbeat. Jake proposed to her on Christmas morning. He had carved her a ring from a piece of elk antler, sanded and polished until it glowed. "I know it is not a real ring," he said awkwardly as he slipped it on her finger. "When we go to town in the spring, I will buy you a proper one with a stone." "This is perfect," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "It is from you, made by your hands. That makes it more valuable than anything you could buy." They were married in late February by a traveling preacher who made his rounds through the mountain settlements. He had been surprised to find a woman living in Jake's cabin, but after talking with them both, he agreed to perform the ceremony. They spoke their vows in front of the fireplace, with only the preacher and God as witnesses, and it was the most meaningful ceremony Clara could have imagined. That night, as husband and wife, they made love for the first time. Jake was gentle and patient, aware of his size and strength, determined to make it good for her. Clara felt cherished and adored, and she gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with the firelight playing over their skin, Clara said, "I prayed for one safe night, and God gave me a whole lifetime instead." Jake tightened his arms around her. "He gave us both a lifetime. I did not know I was lonely until you showed me what it meant to have someone to come home to." Spring came eventually, as it always did in the mountains. The snow melted, the streams ran high with runoff, and wildflowers burst into bloom across the meadows. Jake and Clara made the trip to Silver Ridge to sell his winter's worth of furs and stock up on supplies. Clara was nervous about returning, but when they arrived, they learned that Sela's cowhound had left Montana Territory permanently. Apparently, after the incident at the boarding house, he had decided the frontier was not worth the trouble. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was truly free now. True to his word, Jake bought her a proper wedding ring with a small garnet stone. Clara wore it alongside her antler ring, refusing to take the handmade one off. "This one," she said, touching the antler ring, "represents what we built together. That one," she touched the garnet, "represents your promise to always cherish me. I want both." They spent one night in town, in a real hotel with a real bed, and it felt strange and confining after the open spaces of their mountain home. They were both relieved to head back the next morning, loaded down with supplies and goods. Over the summer, Jake built the additions to the cabin he had promised. With Clara's help, he added a separate bedroom, a larger kitchen area, and a real front porch with a swing. Clara planted a garden and was amazed at how well things grew in the mountain soil with the long hours of summer sun. They acquired chickens from a neighbor 20 miles away, and Clara learned to tend them and collect their eggs. In the fall, Clara realized she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Jake, worried that he would be frightened or overwhelmed, but his reaction was pure joy. He spun her around in his arms, then immediately set her down gently, afraid he had hurt her. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You are going to make me a father." "You are going to be an amazing father," Clara said confidently. "Our children will be so lucky to have you." Their son was born the following spring, delivered with the help of a midwife from a settlement 30 miles away who had arrived 2 weeks before the due date and stayed with them until after the birth. They named him Samuel, after Jake's father, and from the moment Jake held his son in his arms, Clara knew she had been right. He was a natural father, gentle and patient and endlessly devoted. Life in the mountains was hard work, but it was good work. Clara and Jake trapped and hunted, grew and preserved their own food, raised chickens and, eventually, a small herd of goats. They made the trip to town twice a year, but they were always happy to return to their mountain home. 3 years after Samuel was born, they had a daughter they named Ruth, after Jake's sister. 2 years after that came twin boys, which surprised everyone, including the midwife. They named them Daniel and David, and they were as wild and energetic as their older siblings were calm. The cabin grew to accommodate their growing family. Jake built another addition, creating separate sleeping spaces for the children. He made furniture with his own hands, beds and chairs, and a large table where they all gathered for meals. Clara taught the children their letters and numbers, using the skills her father had taught her. Jake taught them to hunt and fish, to respect the wilderness and understand its ways. People in the settlement started calling Jake and Clara the Mountain Family, and their home became a waypoint for travelers and a source of help for anyone who needed it. They never turned anyone away, remembering what it had felt like to be desperate and alone. More than once, Clara found herself offering sanctuary to a woman on the run, just as Jake had once offered it to her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake took Clara on a ride to the place where they had camped on their first journey to the cabin. Their children were staying with neighbors for the night, and it was just the two of them like the old days. They sat by the stream as the sun set, and Jake said, "Do you ever regret it? Staying here, I mean, giving up the chance for an easier life?" Clara looked at her husband, at the face she had come to know better than her own. There was gray in his hair now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting against snow and sun. But he was still the strongest, most capable man she had ever known, and she loved him more with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This life has been everything I could have hoped for and more. We have a beautiful family, a good home, and we have each other. What more could I possibly want?" Jake pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. "I love you, Clara Hollister. Best thing I ever did was stand guard outside your door that night." "Best prayer I ever said," Clara agreed. "Though I only asked for one safe night. God was generous and gave me a lifetime of them." As they sat together watching the stars come out over the mountains, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate, frightened woman running from a man who wanted to do her harm, to a wife and mother living a life full of purpose and love. It had not been an easy path, but it had been the right one. Years continued to pass, measured not by calendars but by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same quiet confidence and gentle strength. He fell in love with a girl from one of the settlements, and they were married in a ceremony at the mountain cabin, with all the neighbors gathered to celebrate. Ruth proved to have her mother's head for numbers, and her father's love of the wilderness. She kept the family's books and helped manage their trading, but she was just as comfortable on a trap line as she was with a ledger. She showed no interest in marriage, declaring that she had no intention of leaving the mountains. Daniel and David were inseparable, getting into mischief together and keeping their parents on their toes. But they were good boys at heart, always willing to help with the work and protective of their mother and sister. As Clara and Jake entered their 50s, they gradually turned more of the daily operations over to their children. Jake's joints ached more in the cold, and Clara's eyesight was not as sharp as it once had been. But they were still healthy and active, still deeply in love, still grateful every day for the life they had built together. One evening, sitting on their porch swing watching the sunset, Jake said, "I have been thinking about that night, the night I first heard you praying. What would have happened if I had just gone to my room and minded my own business?" Clara shuddered. "I do not want to think about it. Calhoun's men would have taken me, or worse, I might not have survived." "But you did survive," Jake said, "and you thrived. You took a bad situation and turned it into something beautiful." "We turned it into something beautiful," Clara corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, Jake. You gave me the safety and security I needed to become the person I was meant to be." Jake smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I think you always were that person. You just needed the right place to show it." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of knowing someone completely. Their children were grown, or nearly so, their home was paid for with years of hard work, and they had everything they needed. "You remember what you said that first night?" Jake asked. "When I told you that you did not need to thank me," Clara thought back. It seemed like a lifetime ago, and in many ways it was. "I do not remember exactly. What did I say?" "You said thank you anyway," Jake recalled. "And you looked at me like I had hung the moon just for you. No one had ever looked at me like that before. Like I mattered. Like I was someone worth knowing." "You are worth knowing," Clara said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, Jake Hollister, and I would thank you every day for the rest of my life if you wanted me to." "I do not need thanks," Jake said. "I just need you." "Well, you have me," Clara said, snuggling closer to him on the swing. "For as long as we both shall live." More years passed. They became grandparents when Samuel and his wife had their first child, a daughter they named Clara after her grandmother. Ruth eventually did meet someone, a widower with 2 young children who needed a strong woman to help him raise them. Daniel and David both found wives and built cabins of their own within a few miles of their parents' home, staying close to the land and the life they had grown up with. Jake and Clara grew old together in the mountains they loved. Their hair turned white, their movements slowed, but their love never diminished. They still sat on the porch together every evening, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same devotion they had felt in those early days. When Jake passed away at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep with Clara beside him, she grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 45 years together, far more than either of them had expected when they first met. Clara lived for 5 more years after Jake's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that the life she and Jake had built would continue long after they were gone. On the day Clara died at the age of 76, her family gathered around her bed. Ruth held one hand, Samuel held the other, and the twins stood at the foot of the bed. Her grandchildren filled the room, some of them now with children of their own. Clara's last words were about Jake. "I see him," she whispered, her eyes fixed on something the others could not see. "He is standing guard, waiting for me, just like that first night." She smiled, and the years seemed to fall away from her face. "I am safe now. I am finally home." She closed her eyes and did not open them again. Her children mourned, but they also celebrated. Their parents had lived full, rich lives, had loved each other deeply, and had created something lasting and beautiful. The mountain family would continue for generations, and every child born into it would hear the story of how it all began. The story of a frightened woman who prayed for one safe night, and a mountain man who heard that prayer and decided to answer it. The story of how standing guard outside a stranger's door had led to a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the small cemetery near the cabin, 2 headstones stood side by side. Jake's read, "He stood guard and found love." Clara's read, "She prayed and found home." Between them, their children had planted wildflowers, the kind that bloomed every spring, colorful and resilient, like the love story that had started it all. The cabin still stood, passed down through the generations, added onto and improved but never abandoned. It remained a symbol of what could be built from a single act of kindness, from one person choosing to help another in their moment of greatest need. And on quiet nights, when the wind whistled through the pines and the stars shone bright over the mountains, people said you could sometimes see 2 figures sitting on the porch swing, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still keeping guard over the family and the home they had created with love, faith, and 45 years of standing together against whatever the world threw at them. The mountain family prospered, generation after generation, but they never forgot the story of their beginning. Every child was taught about Jake and Clara, about the power of prayer and protection, about the courage it takes to trust a stranger and the honor required to prove worthy of that trust. Samuel passed the story to his children, who passed it to theirs. Ruth wrote it all down in a leather-bound journal, preserving every detail so that future generations would know exactly how their family began. The twins made sure that anyone who visited the mountain cabin heard the tale, told with reverence and pride. The story became part of the larger history of Montana Territory, then Montana State. Historians documented it, folklorists collected it, and eventually it was published in collections of frontier tales. But for the family, it was never just a story. It was their heritage, their foundation, the proof that love could flourish anywhere when two people committed to building something together. The rifle Jake had carried that first night was preserved and passed down, along with the pistol he had given Clara to defend herself. The antler ring he had carved for her was kept in a special box, too precious to wear but too important to forget. These items became family heirlooms, tangible connections to the courage and love of their ancestors. As the 20th century dawned and the frontier gave way to civilization, the mountain cabin remained. Roads were built through the wilderness, towns grew larger, and the isolation that Jake and Clara had treasured became harder to find. But the cabin and the land around it stayed in the family, protected and preserved, a reminder of a simpler time when life was hard but love was pure. During World War I, one of Jake and Clara's great-grandsons carried the pistol Jake had given Clara into battle, a reminder of the strength and courage that ran in his blood. He survived the war and returned to the mountains, where he raised his own family in sight of the original cabin. During the Great Depression, the mountain family fared better than most because they had never abandoned the self-sufficient ways Jake and Clara had taught them. They knew how to hunt, fish, trap, and grow their own food, skills that had been passed down through 3 generations. World War II took more of the family's young men, and this time not all of them came home. But those who did return brought their wives and children back to the mountains, back to the cabin, back to the land that had sustained their family for more than 60 years. They rebuilt, they replanted, they carried on the legacy. As the century progressed and the world changed in ways Jake and Clara could never have imagined, the mountain cabin became an anchor for the family, a place to return to when the outside world became too much. Children who had moved to cities for work brought their own children back every summer to learn the old ways, to hear the stories, to understand where they came from. The cabin was renovated but never modernized. There was no electricity, no running water beyond what they pumped from the well Jake had dug. The family kept it as close to the original as possible, wanting future generations to experience something close to what their ancestors had known. Staying at the cabin became a rite of passage, a way for young people to prove they carried the strength and resourcefulness of Jake and Clara in their blood. On the 100th anniversary of the night Jake first stood guard outside Clara's door, the family held a reunion at the cabin. More than 200 people attended, descendants of Jake and Clara from all over the country. They came to honor their ancestors, to reconnect with family, and to reaffirm their commitment to preserving the cabin and the land. The oldest living descendant, Samuel's daughter, who was 92 years old, told the story one more time. She had heard it directly from her grandmother Clara when she was a young girl, and she told it with all the love and emotion of someone who had known the people involved. There was not a dry eye in the crowd when she finished. They were not special people, she concluded. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices, She had the courage to pray for help. He had the honor to provide it. And from that single night of standing guard came all of us. We are the answer to Clara's prayer, continued through time. We are the proof that Jake's choice to protect a stranger was the most important decision he ever made. We are their legacy, and we must never forget it. The family planted a grove of aspen trees near the cabin that day. 100 trees for 100 years. They installed a bronze plaque telling the story of Jake and Clara, ensuring that even if the oral tradition ever faltered, the written word would remain. As the 21st century began, the great-great-great-grandchildren of Jake and Clara still made pilgrimages to the cabin. It had been declared a historical site by the state of Montana, but the family retained ownership and control. They opened it for tours during the summer months, sharing the story with thousands of visitors each year. People came from all over the world to see the place where a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a legendary love story. The cabin had become more than just a building. It was a symbol of hope, proof that safety and love could be found even in the darkest times. It represented the best of human nature. The willingness to help a stranger, the courage to trust, and the power of two people committed to building a life together against all odds. And every night, as the sun set over the mountains and the stars came out one by one, the family members who maintained the cabin said a prayer of thanks. Thanks for Jake, who had heard a desperate plea and responded with action. Thanks for Clara, who had the courage to accept help and the wisdom to recognize love when it found her. Thanks for the 45 years they had together, and the legacy they left behind. The story of Jake and Clara was more than just a family history. It was a reminder that every person has the power to change someone's life, that a single choice to help rather than ignore, to protect rather than exploit, to love rather than use, can echo through generations. Their love story was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about steady faithfulness, about showing up every day, about standing guard not just for one night but for a lifetime. In a world that had become increasingly complicated and cynical, the story of the mountain man and the woman he protected remained beautifully simple. He heard her prayer. He answered it. They fell in love. They built a life. They left a legacy. And in the mountains of Montana, where the pine trees still whispered ancient secrets and the streams still ran cold with glacier melt, their great cabin still stood. It stood as a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, partnership over isolation, and faith over despair. It stood as a reminder that sometimes the most important prayers are the desperate ones, the ones whispered in darkness when all hope seems lost. And sometimes, just sometimes, those prayers are answered not by angels but by ordinary people who make the extraordinary choice to care. The mountain family continued to grow and thrive, spreading across the country, but always maintaining their connection to the cabin and the mountains. And every one of them, from the oldest to the youngest, could recite the story by heart. The story of how their family began with a woman's prayer for one safe night and a man's decision to stand guard until morning light. A decision that became a lifetime commitment and a love story for the ages.